Well, do you know that the number one cause of death in the United States is heart disease? In the United States, every year, about 30 million people are diagnosed with heart disease, and each year, about 650,000 people die from heart disease. And so we happen to be in this series of studies that we've entitled Enemies of the Heart, and it's a series that we've adapted from Andy Stanley's book titled Enemies of the Heart, but you need to know this isn't a series about your physical heart. This is actually a series about your other heart. You know, the other heart, the invisible part where philosophers, poets, and preachers talk all the time about the other part of your life. And it's that thing that gets broken. It was broken in the 9th grade when what's-her-name said she only wanted to be friends. It's that thing inside of you that swells up with pride when you see your kids do something great, or it's that thing that gets all nostalgic when you hear an old Leonard Skinner song, Freebird maybe, or whatever song was popular when you were a senior in high school. And so let me just ask you the question right up front. How's your heart? And I'm not talking about your physical heart. How is your other heart? Now, because it's invisible, it's often hard to know exactly how our heart is doing. It's hard to know the condition of our heart, of our soul. And typically, it's often when our heart is not doing well that we become aware of its condition. And that's not really all that unusual. We do this with a lot of other things in life. I mean, when the car is running well, we don't give it a second thought. But when there's a new tick in the engine or a hesitation when we step on the gas, we begin to wonder, I wonder how my car is really doing. And we don't think about the internet connection until it's too slow. And cell towers never enter our minds until we lose reception on our phones. And air conditioners never enter our minds until our house becomes unbearably warm. Now, maybe you've already noticed your heart starting to slip a bit. And it tends to show up mainly in our relationships. And lately, maybe there's been an edge to your voice that scares even you, or there's that occasional outburst that slips through your normally controlled front, and you say something or you do something that surprises everyone else around you, or you do something or say something that surprises even you. I mean, you know your heart is slipping when you find yourself making comments like, I can't believe I just said that. I don't know where that came from. I can't believe I did that. Or, oh, that's not like me at all. I'll never give my heart to anyone again. Or she broke my heart. And God has a lot to say about our hearts. God's concerned about the condition of our hearts. And so God says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. And what happens when we fail to guard our hearts is that when we neglect to check the condition of our hearts, that's when our lives begin to change directions. The course is changed, and usually when we change directions, when we change courses, it's not a good change. I mean, that's when suddenly someone files for divorce. That's when suddenly a kid's grades drop and his attitude begins to change. That's suddenly when a harmless pastime becomes a destructive habit, or maybe out of nowhere, devastating words pierce the soul of an unsuspecting loved one. And here's the sad thing. It tends to be the people that are closest to you who routinely catch the flack thrown off from the explosive stuff that's going on inside your heart. And it may not come out on the golf course, and it doesn't usually come out in casual acquaintances or settings, and it almost never comes out in social settings, but it's when your heart is most often coming out, it's when you're at home, and when you've turned off the safety and when you've let down your guard, and that's when your heart exposes itself in the most negative ways to the people that you happen to love most. And see, unfortunately, we tend to hurt most those who we love the most. And so in this series, we're actually looking at 4 primary enemies of the heart. 4 enemies of the heart that have the potential to erode your relationships, or 4 enemies of the heart that can erode your character, or 4 enemies of the heart that may even damage your faith and your relationship with God. And so you may want to pull out a notepad or your phone so you can take some notes, because I think there's going to be some things you want to write down. And you might also want to grab a Bible, because we're going to talk about what Jesus has to say about life, and not just my thoughts, my feelings, but Jesus' words. And so let's jump in by zeroing in on one of the greatest enemies of the heart, the enemy that goes by the name of anger. Now, seldom does anyone admit that they have an anger issue. I mean, rarely do I meet someone who says, yep, that's me. I've got an issue. I struggle with anger. I'm just an angry man, or I'm just an angry woman. I mean, I don't ever hear that. Instead, what we'll often admit to is being mad. We'll say, oh, you make me so mad, but I don't really have a problem with anger. But maybe you do. I mean, if you're not sure, if you struggle with anger, ask the people around you, especially those closest to you. And when you ask them, listen to what they say. And if they pause before they answer, you might have an anger problem. Or listen to how you respond. And if you feel like there's this volcano brewing inside of you as they speak about you, you might have an anger problem. So let's begin by just defining anger. See, anger is this perception that something has been taken from you. And because something has been taken from you, you feel like, oh, something is owed to you. When someone hurts you, there's a sense in which they've taken something away from you. A debt has incurred. And if somebody gossips about you, it amounts to that person stealing your good reputation. Or if your employer fires you unjustly, you have this sense that they just robbed you of financial security. Or if your husband has been unfaithful to you, then he's robbed you of emotional security or a stable home life or a solid family or perhaps much, much more. And see, anger is really about the fact that something has been taken from me. And so anger says, you owe me. You took something from me, you owe me. And because something has been taken, the angrier person approaches life and love and relationships looking to be paid back because something has been taken away. But let me in on a little secret, and it's this. Payback doesn't work. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be repaid. The problem is that in most cases, it's impossible to be reimbursed from what was taken. And let me ask you this, can a man who abandoned his kids ever really replace what he's taken from them? Or can a son who's made his parents' life hell for the last 6 years ever repay back what he has taken? Or how do you restore time or affection? How does a mother pay back her grown daughter for not being there to tuck her in at night as a child? Or you can't pay back a missing relationship. There's no way to make up for years of criticism or neglect. And I mean, how does somebody pay back your innocence or your purity? And these are debts that can't be repaid. And the truth is, nothing can make up for the past. And so, if anger is caused by a debt that cannot be repaid, the question is, what are we supposed to do about it? How are we supposed to be responding to that? I mean, can we do anything about our anger? Well, one day, Jesus tackled the issue head on. One time after having been pulled aside by one of his followers, a man named Peter. And if you have a Bible handy, then you might want to pull it out or pull out your phone and open it up to Matthew chapter 18, verse 23. And Jesus tells a story to answer the question of what we should do when anger and a debt we have in our lives, when it cannot be repaid. Matthew chapter 18. I'm going to begin reading in verse 23 of Matthew chapter 18. Jesus tells a story. He says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars. So the king says, I'm going to make up all my accounts. You owe me money, millions of dollars. This servant couldn't repay it, so his master ordered that he be sold, along with his wife, his children, and everything he owned to pay the debt. But the man fell down before his master and begged him, please be patient with me, and I'll pay it all back. And then the master was filled with pity for him, and he released him and forgave him his debt. Now, what's helpful about this story, it's called a parable, is Jesus is talking about this emotionally charged topic of anger, but he talks about it in a way that all of us can understand. Jesus takes the mystery out of anger, and simply put, Jesus says the remedy for anger, he says it's forgiveness. And forgiveness is this decision that I'm going to cancel a debt. You don't owe me anymore. Now, whenever there's hurt, there's always a debt. Somebody owes somebody something, and this is why we say things like, I'm going to get even with you. And in Jesus' story, the master was going to settle his debt with a servant by just selling the servant. Not only the servant, but his wife, his children, everything that this guy possessed. And so the servant did the only thing that he could possibly do. He pleads for mercy, and then he says something really that's pretty absurd. He promises, he says, I'll pay back my debt, a debt that he could never repay. I mean, he owed an enormous amount of money. Never could he repay that in his lifetime, and his debt was way beyond his ability to repay. But fortunately for him, his master was merciful and took pity on him, and he canceled the debt. And the master decided to forgo his right to be paid back. And that's the essence of forgiveness, a decision to cancel a debt. But Jesus goes on. He wasn't finished with the story, and so he picks it up again, verse 28. Jesus said, "But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. 'Be patient with me and I'll pay it,' he pleaded." And all of a sudden, this forgiven servant, he's in the same position as his master. He's in a place of power, and his buddy owes him a small amount, comparatively so, and an amount that if given time, he could actually repay it. And we would expect that this man who just had this massive debt forgiven, that he would extend the same grace and mercy to his fellow servant. Instead, Jesus says, but his creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until his debt could be paid in full. And so Jesus goes on with his story, verse 31. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. They went to the king and told him everything that had happened. Then the king called the man who he had forgiven, and he said, "You evil servant, I forgave you the tremendous debt because of you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you?" Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. And I would imagine everybody listening to this story of Jesus, they had to be agreeing with what he was saying. Anybody ungrateful deserves to have to pay their debt, but Jesus still wasn't done. He throws in one more piece to the story with a final comment in verse 35. Jesus says, "That's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart." That's what my heavenly Father will do for you. There are people in our lives that have offended us. There are people in our lives that have hurt us, that have embarrassed us, that have abandoned us, maybe even rejected us. And these are people who owe us. These are people who we have a legitimate case against. And Jesus' words in this story couldn't be any clearer. He says, you know what? Cancel their debt. You need to forgive them. And it's almost like Jesus adds verse 35 to say, or else. Forgive them or else. But it's not so easy to forgive. And often we find pleasure in just kind of holding on to a grudge. In a strange way, it feels kind of good to hold on to this debt of being owed by someone else. And lately, Ruth and I have been watching a series on Netflix, and it's so old school, and I would kind of describe it as a newer version of Little House on the Prairie, and it is so clean and pristine, it's refreshing, and we're actually loving watching it. It's called When Calls the Heart. And so Thursday night, while we're watching When Calls the Heart, Abigail, one of the characters, is struggling with the issue of anger, and she's struggling with making the choice to forgive. And so Brian, a friend, tells Abigail, he says, "Abigail, anger is kind of like having a bad tooth. You know you need to do something about that bad tooth, but you're so worried about the pain that is going to be caused by taking it out, and you think it's going to be worse than having it, and so you decide to leave it there. But we all know at some point you've got to get rid of the bad tooth. And if we ever want to be free from the pain, at some point we've got to pull the tooth. And the same is true with anger. If we ever want to be free from the pain, at some point we've got to get rid of anger. And the only way to get rid of anger comes through canceling the debt. And canceling the debt only comes through forgiveness. So let me ask you, how long are you going to keep that bad tooth? How long are you going to hold on to your anger? How long are you going to allow people who you don't even like, people who are no longer even in your life, maybe people who aren't even alive yet, how long are you going to allow them to control your life? And you might as well get a calendar out and pick a date and say, okay, I'm going to allow them to control me up until now or this date in the future. And I mean, if you stop and think about it, it's pretty ridiculous to allow people that have hurt you the most to influence your current and future relationships. And while it's true you can't undo what's been done, it's equally true that you don't have to let the past control your future. You can be free from anger. You can release the debt. And so let me give you 4 steps to forgiveness, 4 steps to canceling the debt, and all of them very specific, very simple, but harder to do. Step 1, identify who it is that you're actually angry with. Forgiveness is more than just a decision that you're going to move on with your life and forget the past. Trying to forget the past, trying to forget a debt isn't the same as canceling it. And so make a list of any of the people who may have mistreated you or taken advantage of you. I mean, who do you think of when you think, oh, I never want to see them again? Or who do you find yourself having imaginary conversations with and you win in your mind? And who would you like to pay back if you thought you could get away with it? And what do you see? Who do you secretly desire you'd love to see them fail? And poke around every area of your life. Is it family? Is it friends? Maybe it's an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend or ex-husband or ex-wife or a deceased parent or associates at work, or it could be coaches or bosses. But identify, first of all, who is it that you're angry with? You know you're upset. Who is it that's making you angry? Step 2, determine what is it that they owe you. And this is a step that most of us skip. I mean, you know that there's a person that hurt you, but have you taken the time to figure out exactly what did they take from you? And it's important to pinpoint what was taken from you, because that'll tell you what people you need to just release the debt, cancel the debt. That'll tell you who on your list still owes you. And so what did they take from you? What would they need to return in order to put things back the way they were before? Is it an apology? Are you looking for money? Is it time? Is it marriage? Is it family? Is it a job? Is it a reputation? Is it an opportunity? Is it a promotion? Is it a new chapter in your life? I mean, be real specific. You can't cancel a debt that you haven't clearly identified. And third step, go ahead and cancel the debt. After you've identified exactly what was taken from you, you've got to cancel the debt. And that means deciding that the offending party doesn't owe you anything anymore. And this may be as simple as just making the decision in your mind and quietly in your heart, I'm going to cancel the debt. Or you may want to make your decision and mark it with something more tangible. I heard of one person who actually listed what was owed to them, and they put a list in an envelope, and then they burned it, and they declared, man, those debts are canceled. Or another woman buried her list in her backyard. And step 4, dismiss the case. Be done with it. The final step centers on a daily decision that you're not going to reopen the case again. And what makes this so difficult is that our feelings don't automatically follow our decision to forgive. And see, forgiveness, it doesn't erase our memories. And if we could forgive and forget, the whole thing would be a lot easier. But in most cases, no sooner have we decided to forgive then all of a sudden something happens to remind us of the offense all over again, and all those old feelings begin flooding back in once again. And so then at that point, we usually do one of two things. We either take hold of that offense all over again, and we get all cranked up in having these imaginary conversations, and we reopen the case again, or we decide, I'm just not going to think about it. We try to turn our thoughts elsewhere, but neither of those responses appropriately help or move away the pain that we're feeling. And so why not, instead of reopening the case against your offender, why not take the opportunity to restate your decision? Every time it comes back into your mind, just make the decision, he doesn't owe me anymore. She doesn't owe me anymore. Now, as you decide you're going to forgive and cancel the debt, let me just warn you. It's going to be especially tough to do because Jesus tells us that we have an enemy that's constantly whispering in our ear and telling us he still owes you. She still owes you. Don't let them off the hook. They still owe you. If you let them off the hook this time, they'll keep burning you again and again and again. Don't you remember what he did to you? Can't you get back what he owes you? You can't let him get away with that. And Jesus cautions us, and he tells us that we have an enemy. Jesus names him. His name is Satan, and he's working against us, and he's whispering in our ear, and he's trying to bring us down, and he's trying to discourage us, and he's trying to destroy us, and he's whispering in your ear, and he's telling you, he still owes you, she still owes you. But Jesus says, don't listen to Satan. Jesus actually calls Satan the father of lies. Jesus says Satan is a liar. And here's the thing, if you choose to listen to the lies of Satan, what you're doing is you're choosing to listen to Satan over listening to Jesus, because Jesus says, cancel the debt. But Satan says, no, she still owes you. But the question is, who is it that you're listening to right now in the midst of your anger? And I just need to pause and say that if you happen to be in an abusive relationship, Jesus will say you need to forgive the abuser, but he's not telling you that you need to stay in that relationship only to be abused again and again. If you're in an abusive relationship, you need to get out. You need to ask for help, and you can call the church office, and we will do anything we can to help you. There's no excuse for abuse in any relationship. And forgiving an abuser doesn't mean sitting back and continuing to take the abuse again and again. It just means that you're canceling the debt so that you can move on with your life. Now, the whole reason it's possible for you and me to forgive anyone is because we've been forgiven. It all begins with Jesus. The Apostle Paul said, forgive one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. And when God forgives me and when God forgives you, God offers you and he offers me a brand new heart through Jesus. And when we come to Jesus, God says, I'll give you a brand new heart, and I'll put a new spirit in you, and I'll take out your old, stony, stubborn heart, and I'll give you a tender, responsive heart. And this enemy that Jesus speaks of, Satan, Jesus calls him the father of lies, and Satan wants to hold you down. He wants to destroy your heart by telling you that you've done way too much to ever be forgiven, or too much has been done to you for you to have any value whatsoever. And there's an enemy that's telling you that you're no good, that you have no value whatsoever. But can I just say, don't listen to that voice in your head. Don't let him hold you down. Don't let him destroy your heart. God has forgiven you, and he's given you a brand new heart. And just as God has forgiven you, he says, now you forgive others. Just as God has declared through Jesus, you don't owe me anymore, you too can declare to the one who has hurt you, you don't owe me anymore. Why? Because it's for your own good. No longer do you have to be held captive by those who have hurt you. So here's my challenge to you today. Today, choose to follow Jesus. Don't choose to follow Satan. Stop allowing him to hold you down. So today, make the choice to follow Jesus. He's the one that's actually forgiven you, and he says now you choose to forgive others as well. And Jesus offers to each and every one of us a brand new heart, and your new heart is waiting for you, and it's there for the taking. It's as simple as just admitting that you need a new heart, and then coming to Jesus and saying, Jesus, I need a brand new heart from you. And it's simply receiving it. It's taking it. He's offering it to you, so why not take it now, right now? I mean, tell him you're ready for your brand new heart. If you'd like to talk to somebody about your brand new heart, or if you'd like someone to pray with you about anything that we've talked about today or anything that you're struggling with, right now the chat on the screens will remain open for the next 10 minutes or so. And stick around and let us know how we can pray for you. Or you can go to the website at any time and click on the prayer button and let us know how we can be praying for you. If you're at one of our locations as we close, there'll be people up in the front left corner of each of our auditoriums, and they would also love to pray with you. If you'd like to go deeper and further on today's topic and the topic of anger and forgiveness as we close, we'll have some questions on the screen for you to ponder, and either on your own or maybe better yet, why not discuss these questions with a family member or maybe with friends? LCBC, as you go through this coming week, may the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week as we look further into the enemies of the heart.